So it may be hard to believe, but Paper Mario came out 20 years ago today in Japan on August 11th, 2000. Now for those in North America, it's a few months later, being February 5th, 2001, but we're going by the Japanese dates here, and in either case, I cannot believe it's been that long. So to discuss everything Paper Mario with us today, we have John, Ash, as well as Xander from Nintendo World Report. So how are you guys all doing?
Doing all right.
Hello, hello.
Paper thick.
Did you say keep it thick?
That's what I heard too.
I'm doing paper thick.
Oh, paper
I'm
thick,
pretty
okay.
flat myself, but alright.
That's a little bit better. So given the fact that Origami King just came out, I figured this is really just all too perfect of a time to discuss where Paper Mario got its start, largely, depending on how you look at things, with the original back on Nintendo 64, particularly given the case that I feel like this game almost too often gets overlooked in light of the pedestal that Thousand Year Door is often put upon, and to the point that I feel like people forget about this game, that a lot of what Thousand Year Door owes to its success started here in the original on Nintendo 64. So before we get into our overall thoughts on the game and how well it may or may not hold up if we revisit it recently, I want to find out where you guys were at the time of this game's release, or when you actually ended up playing it. Because I know for a couple of you, you may have been on the younger / non-existent side when this game first came out. So Ash, let's start off with you because you're around my age. Where were you at when Paper Mario first released?
What are you talking about? I'm as young as John is. I didn't play this when it first came out. I mean, you're crazy. No, I was around 16 when Paper Mario came out, so I played it right when it came out, actually. I remember I was following it for, months and probably even more than a year up to its release because, I'm sure you guys all know, it was originally called Super Mario RPG 2. And so I was just super excited at the thought of, another story in that universe, thinking maybe this would be a direct sequel, despite the way the art style looked and everything. Then, of course, it ended up being its own game, but I played it right when it came out. I was hyped for it, and I really enjoyed it back when I played it back in the day, and then I replayed it for a second time on Wii U, maybe, I don't know, 5-ish years ago, and I found that it really held up, so I played it right when it came out. I was just, a 16-year-old in high school doing 16-year-old high school things and really enjoying Paper Mario.
So I'll slot myself in there real quick since I'm in the same age demographic there, and except I think I was just... So this game came out 3 days before my birthday, so I'm confident this is a birthday gift for me. And that will put me, I think at just turning 16 myself in that case. So I was just turning 16. Like you said, I was hyped for this game based on Super Mario RPG, and I was a huge fan of that game. So having a pseudo sequel to that game, as you said, it began development officially as that, had me just stoked for what this game could be. And sure enough, I ended up thoroughly enjoying it. It was, even if it did seem to me that it may have been skewing a little bit younger, especially at that age demographic where we're in our teens, or we're over this baby stuff, and then this game begins with basically a storybook and this very kiddie-like music. But despite all of that, no, I had a great time with it, thoroughly enjoyed it, and I've revisited it many times over the years. Not so much recently, aside from yesterday when I picked it up for this purpose. So, how about you, John? What was going on with you at the time of its release and when you eventually played it?
So you guys were 16 when this released. I was 6. So I didn't play when it came out, and much like a lot of Nintendo's legacy content, much like most of the legacy content, I experienced it through Virtual Console. And I was at that stage where I was just buying anything on Virtual Console without any research. I bought Donkey Kong Jr. Math without really knowing what it was. I thought, math here is called maths, so I thought it was like Wrath. I didn't know what math meant. I thought it was meant to be this big, epic funny Donkey Kong sequel, and it was a maths game. So then I also picked up Paper Mario, not knowing it was an RPG. And in fact, I never played a Mario RPG before that, because Mario RPG on the Super Nintendo didn't release on the Super Nintendo in Europe, and it didn't come to Virtual Console until way later.
Cannot believe that. Wow.
Yeah,
that's crazy. I mean, we did have Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga, so I have much of an excuse there. I didn't play that one until later. So this was my experience of of Mario having a story for the first time. Apart from before this, Mario to me was just save the princess from Bowser, and that's it. So elaborating on that with a much grander premise was pretty alien to me, and that's part of what makes this one so special. To me at least. That, and the spin. No other Paper Mario game has a little spin when you press Z. I miss that spin so much.
I felt right at home when I started up this game for the first time yesterday. I'm like, oh my god, the spin is so good, and I missed it every day we revisited Thousand Year Door. How about you though, Xander? I think your story is a little bit similar to John's.
Yeah.
Minus the European part.
I was 3 years old when the Japanese game came out, and I did not play it until it came to the Virtual Console. And I was like, 21, 20 when I first played it, whereas I grew up with 1,000 Year Door and Superstar Saga right around when this game would have been, I guess, targeted at my age. But yeah, it's, even though it's kind of weird that I played it so later after the fact, I think having played all the other Paper Marios and most of the Mario and Luigi games, it was very nice to kind of see the origins of the first Paper Mario. And my first feeling was, wow, this feels like a very less complicated version of the 1,000 Year Door, which I know that game like the back of my hand. And it was just kind of neat to be able to revisit characters who kind of show up in the 1,000 Year Door, or at least their races do, even though obviously Paper Mario came out first. It was just kind of a really neat experience to kind of, almost like I was getting a sequel in a sense, even though I played the sequel first.
Like a prequel. Yeah, you were able to get the backstory on some of these characters.
Yeah, a prequel, yeah.
And yeah, I think you and John kind of touched on something there where, this is a Mario game with a story, which is something we hadn't seen much of at this point. Super Mario RPG was the first kind of, the first time we saw the series really dip its toes into telling a story. And now we had a game which, if I recall correctly, even began development after its Super Mario RPG 2 moniker. I believe at one point it was known as Paper Mario Story. So it was pretty clear that they're putting an emphasis on the story this time. Again, the game basically opens with a storybook. And yeah, it's always fun to see something we were so familiar with at that time, or at least, especially me and Ash. I'm sure both of you too, when you finally got around to playing it, having this universe finally fleshed out to the story beyond what had been touched on in third-party properties, like in the cartoons and the Mario movie, which are kind of amazing in their own right. But we finally had an official story to the Mushroom Kingdom. And something else you guys have touched on too is, as you had said, Xander, this game felt, even compared to 1,000 Year Door, it feels a little bit simpler, and that's by design. Shigeru Miyamoto had said that they were developing this game with amateur gamers in mind. And I think that's part of what makes this game, what makes Paper Mario, the series in general, but specifically the first two in particular, so interesting, because they basically took a look at an RPG and boiled it down to basics. And that's even after Mario RPG had already simplified the entire idea. Paper Mario took it to its logical extremes, to the point that you only have 2 party members out at a time at once. Every hit point literally matters. You start this game with, I think, 10 HP. And even the economy is based around every coin mattering. You have objects, or you can buy things that cost, I think, as few as maybe 3 coins. And all of this really contributes to a combat system that is on the surface simple, but has just enough depth to it to actually force you to use some strategy at points, especially once they introduce the whole star aspect. That's what makes Paper Mario so appealing, is it's a simplified RPG without being stupid simple.
Right.
I think the highest damage Mario can do in a move is 12.
Right,
We're talking tiny numbers here. Right at the start of the game, you do 1 damage, and I like that. I like that every move matters, and literally doing 1 more bit of damage is important. That can make the difference between a victory and a failure.
Right.
Right, and in the original, partners didn't even have their own HP. It was just either pass or fail. If they get hit, they're knocked out for a few turns, but it's easy to forget that playing, the 1,000 Year Door, replaying it a couple of months ago for Game Club. It's easy to just take the fact that your partners have their own HP for granted, but Paper Mario the original was so simple, and such a pared-down version of that, I should say, 1,000 Year Door is a paired-up version of Paper Mario 64, but it's crazy just how simple it was, and just how back to basics it was, but that only, that simplicity, as you said, Andre, was only on the surface. I mean, it definitely masked what was actually a fairly deep combat system, especially for the time.
And the badges also further add as much complexity as you want to the combat. You could probably ignore them if you want, you'd probably be a fool to, but these add just another layer, allowing you to basically customize how you battle to your preferred playstyle. Myself, I tend to these days go with a badge-only strategy, which means I'm depending so much on the heart and the flower point recovery options in order to keep me in the battle. Because as it turns out, 5 flower points don't get you very far on the per battle basis. And even too, I love how they give you the option of how you want to upgrade your stats. Once you level up, then you can choose whether you want flower points, heart points, or badge points. And that's just such a fun touch of letting you again customize your experience and making the upgrade really feel impactful. Unlike most RPGs where you get like a subtle boost, here you feel and see the difference immediately.
Right.
Do you know what's weird? Like, you're kind of describing a skill tree, but like a far more elegant one where you can literally customize and build your character and be flexible with whatever you want.
Yeah.
Because like with skill trees, you've got to work your way through these things you don't want just to get to the thing that you do want. Whereas with the badges, you can literally unequip and experiment and find the actual scheme that you want. And it's doing this like decades before skill trees became a staple in game design.
Yeah, 100%.
Right.
I think you and I, John, have gone on record as not being huge fans of at least most modern implementations of skill trees. And going back, yeah, exactly, same here. And going back to these two games, the original two Paper Marios, have felt like such a breath of fresh air. It's like, yeah, that's how you incorporate a quasi skill tree into your game without it feeling out of place or cumbersome and kind of narrative breaking too. Like, it always bugs me in a game when you just all of a sudden remember how to do a move because of how you chose to upgrade your character.
So are you going to do a badge points only run?
I started doing that last night. That's exclusively how I play Paper Mario these days. Badge points only. I did it for 1,000 Year Door and pulled it off. It was tough, but I made it.
I tend to balance my approach. Actually, Xander, one thing I want to get your opinion on, because you grew up with 1,000 Year Door. Personally, I look back on 64, and despite it starting a bit slow, because you can't actually do your action commands until, I think, after the first boss or
Correct,
so.
yeah.
Yes, you can't, guard, and you can't do, extra damage on a press after that. Apart from that, I feel like this is one of the most consistently great games in the series. Like, 1,000 Year Door, while it certainly has higher highs, I think it also has lower lows, whereas 64 is just more consistent to me, than most of the other games. Where do you sit on that?
I largely agree with you. Obviously there's like that nostalgic bias that I'm always like, oh man, I love that game so much. But having played the original one not too long ago and having started it again, there are definitely moments where I'm like, yeah, this game's actually doing some elements better. There's not as much backtracking. There is some, but it's largely running around in circles, I guess, trying to find like the thing you're supposed to do. I think of like Shy Guy's Toy Box as an example. It's like swapping between different areas, trying to like get to the next zone. But it's never really forcing you to go left and right like it does several times in the 1,000 Year Door. So I have to really commend it for that. I remember when I started this game and it wouldn't give me the option to do the action commands. I was kind of like, whoa. Like,
how simple is this?
I was kind of shocked by that, but I was very happy that eventually I got to that tutorial. But I think, obviously I will always prefer the 1,000 Year Doors because I have that nostalgic bias, but, this game's pretty great. It's been really fun to come back to, and I would still recommend it. I would love to see Nintendo revisit it in some form, but, who's to say that's going to happen? But, by and large, it's a great experience overall.
Yeah, Xander, I agree with a lot of what you just said, and I think looking back on Paper Mario 64 is interesting from the standpoint that that this is when the series was just getting its footing, right? They were laying the groundwork for what would ultimately be a franchise for Nintendo. But yeah, John, you kind of mentioned when you said it has 1,000 Year Door has higher highs, but also lower lows, and I think there's something special in the fact that 64 is the baseline Paper Mario game. It plays it safe for that reason, and it really gives you that brazen look at exactly what Paper Mario gets so right without the distractions, I would say. And that's not a bad thing necessarily, but without the distractions in later games that would try to innovate on top of that baseline formula.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, this game the story itself is even pretty basic too. Of course, Bowser shows up, he kidnaps Peach, and you're trying to rescue her. Now, there is a little bit more to it, involving the Star Haven and the missing Star Wand, which is used to grant wishes, along with the 7 wise, whatever they call them, 7 wisdom stars, the 7
Star Spirits.
Right? Star Spirits. There we go. In Mario Party 5, and when I played this game for the first time, I was like, "Wait, they're from that game?"
I do love that. They brought them back one time as a random cameo, basically in Mario Party. But what's interesting about that is for as simple the setup is, it's also basically just Mario RPG again. That's the exact same setup they had in the original game. You have the Star Road in that case. It's used to grant wishes. It gets damaged, which is effectively the Star Wand being removed, and you have to go look for 7 stars around the world in order to recover it. Now that game actually went a little bit farther with the premise, in that it turns out Bowser's not the ultimate bad guy. You actually end up having him join your team at some point, and you're instead fighting off an alien invasion essentially. So that game is actually a little bit more interesting, I think, than where Paper Mario takes it. Which kind of speaks to, again, to what Paper Mario is doing, and that's boiling everything to its core essentials, and is building a game around that. And there is something about that simplicity that is just kind of inviting. I think the pace of this game in general is better than the Thousand Year Door. The backtracking that I used to consider annoying in this game, including going up to the Star Haven area back and forth a few times, is nowhere near compared to what it is in Thousand Year Door. It's like a screen in this game, whereas in Thousand Year Door, it's multiple minutes long sequences over and over. So I think that is where Paper Mario gets its strength. It's just an overall more even experience, even if the highs aren't as good as Thousand Year Doors.
Yeah, the plot is basic, but it also elaborates a lot more on your basic Mario story. And one thing I always look back on with a lot of pleasure is thinking about those moments where you control Peach, and she's being captured and she can't really escape. But you're kind of just playing as her, trying to get out of the castle, knowing there's no real way to do it. But you just get this perspective of what it's like to be her and be held prisoner. And those moments, they're some of my favorite ones. They're just super jolly and quite cozy.
Well, it's like a stealth game. You're trying to sneak past Bowser's baddies in order to further your objectives in the castle. And I love that, and I think these sequences are specifically better than the ones in Thousand Year Door, which felt oftentimes more limited and smaller in scale, whereas here it kind of felt like you're having more of a direct impact on the story.
The perspective of sneaking can be funny sometimes. I remember the guards were patrolling the castle halls.
With the flashlights.
And their line of sight is so small. You can walk in front of them and they won't see you.
Yeah, they had flashlights specifically to show where they would see.
Yeah.
And there's special items you can put in that chest to give to Mario, which is really cool.
That's right. Yeah.
Right, I remember that now. One other thing that 64 does better than Thousand Year Door is its ice area. I love ice and snow worlds in games, and replaying the Thousand Year Door recently really brought back into sharp focus just how poor the ice area in that game is. I mean, it's all of 3 screens, and you're at Bob-omb Village, and you have to backtrack there so much anyway because of the nature of that stupid chapter. But by comparison, the Crystal Palace in Paper Mario 64, I loved that dungeon, and the music was great. Getting up to the Crystal Palace is great. That's just
you kind of
snow guy.
Quickly went over it there. As part of the lead up to the Crystal Palace, Mario becomes a murder suspect. Mario's a suspect of murder in this game. And I love that. You can see the early starts of what would become more elaborate set pieces in Thousand Year Door, but they go pretty far here too, and I love that. How each chapter once again is its own self-contained story that kind of fits into the larger narrative, but they are mostly self-contained. And that is such a fun aspect of this, whether it's exploring a mansion, uncovering the mystery of Tubba Blubba, and or as I just said, you're trying to absolve yourself of this crime you've been accused of. And they kind of play on that a little bit even in Thousand Year Door, involving the train and the similar type of detective character.
Yeah, with that chapter in particular, I remember when I played Paper Mario for the first time, I was thinking wow, this is very similar to the train chapter from the Thousand Year Door, and in a weird way, it almost made me kind of I don't know, I don't want to say I felt attacked, but I was wow, the thing that I loved so much, is actually the copycat, you know what I mean?
Right.
It's which in a weird, it was a weird transition for me to think about that, but now I'm wow, it really did get its inspiration from this game by doing that, and not to take away from the Thousand Year Door, but it gives me more respect for the N64 game for being so novel in that.
I totally agree. And there's a few elements of this game that you can see that are evocative of what will come in Thousand Year Door. I said in our Game Club episode of Thousand Year Door for Chapter 1 that the first 2 chapters of both games feel very similar, exploring a kind of basic, plains area, and you come across a Koopa village, and you of course have a castle at the end as well. And so there were parts of Thousand Year Door that felt repetitive and didn't do a whole lot to move it forward, but then Thousand Year Door turns into more of its own thing. Particularly with, I do love the contrast of going from Toad Town in this game, which is a pristine Disneyland-like environment minus the missing castle, to Rogueport in Thousand Year Door, which is basically, Six Flags or something by comparison. It's grungy, it's dirty. So it is fun to see the comparisons and what got started here versus how they built upon it in Thousand Year Door, if at all.
Yeah, I mean, the original does have those generic sort of desert water world sort of theming, I guess, to it, but it's sort of held up by the art style as well, which is drastically different to what Mario's done before. Actually, one thing I was thinking about just now was in the desert, there's this very Zelda 1-like puzzle. Do you remember in the Zelda 1 overworld, there's a certain dungeon where to get to it, you've got to go up, down, down, or whatever in the overworld to find it. And the desert has exactly that puzzle, where you've literally got to go the right direction, or else you get lost and sort of reset yourself. Mm-hmm. So it's cool how it takes these themes, but then finds something more to do with it, especially because this was one of the... I guess it's like a hybrid 2D, 3D game. So taking what would usually be a 2D Mario staple and just elaborating on it more in third dimension was pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does that also with the Crystal Palace as well, with those mirror puzzles. It's actually very Zelda-like in that regard.
Well, and that's not even the only thing there is to find in that desert. I think it was, if I remember correctly, it was a 5x5 grid, essentially, of 20, maybe 4x5.
I think it's bigger than that.
Maybe it was bigger than that, yeah. But especially for that time, and on the N64, it was nice that Nintendo was willing to, especially for a game that they... that Miyamoto said was supposed to be, for amateur gamers. They let you get lost in that chapter,
right.
And there is a bunch of optional stuff that you can just go out of your way and find and really get lost if you want to. And it's funny looking at that through the lens of Origami King, because Origami King has that kind of open-ish desert area too, that obviously isn't anywhere near the same kind of thing. But it's kind of funny where that you see 20 years later where that concept has kind of been in a way reused a little bit in the latest game in the series.
Yeah, I definitely have memories of the original desert when I was playing through the Origami King, and I love that Zelda NES comparison, by the way, too, John. I never really quite made that connection, but it straight up is Zelda NES. You have this giant grid, with 4 directions leading out of each area. That's so interesting. The only main difference is that this one's far more interconnected than that one ever was. And I think as part of that too, I love, one of my favorite things about games is when you're in an area, then you uncover a new element of it or a new section that you weren't aware of before. And that's something that I think the 2D/3D art style they go for here is especially conducive to, where they can hide things kind of in a way that you wouldn't suspect, but when it reveals itself, you're like, whoa, I didn't see that coming. And I reminded specifically, since we're talking about the desert chapter, there's a part where you have to solve a puzzle, I think by buying particular items in the store
that's right.
in a set order, which they reused, by the way, in Thousand Year Door. Again, lessening its impact then.
Right.
And then I think this gives way to a hidden alley or something, or you find some secret area behind the entire town, as I recall. I could be misremembering slightly. But I just love elements like that use the environment, use things that you're familiar with, in a way that kind of twists it slightly, and it exposes something that you weren't aware of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that entire area is really good. I remember you go to this sort of slimy, sleazy town, and then I think they give you a hint to buy a certain item, and doing that will take you to this this back alley, and yeah, that's just a great setting. And as we were saying earlier, that just sort of evolves on what the desert was in prior Mario games. Really makes it its own thing. Mm-hmm. Thinking about more of Paper Mario 64, one thing jumped into my mind. I can't believe we've not mentioned this yet. Junior Trooper, that egg thing.
He's the best.
That thing that waddles around with an eggshell on his head. What was that?
I don't know, but I love him so much. The thing for me is, up until, for the first several playthroughs of the game I had, I'm finally at a point where this is no longer an issue, unfortunately, but I would always forget about that guy. So every time it popped up in the story, I was always surprised, and I found it hilarious. And the one that I remember most fondly is when you're on the island area, the tropical island, and he's swimming through the ocean to come at you, chasing after you. I love that. So that's a fun recurring character that I don't know. It doesn't really add. He doesn't add anything to the story, as I recall. He's just there. He just hates you.
He gets hard to beat, though. Yeah. I have to say, I remember struggling with those last few fights with him.
Does he get bat wings at some point?
Yeah, he's got the ability to fly, and he's got a spike on his head. I'm just how am I supposed to take him down?
Right. I think this is, I guess, one of maybe my criticisms of the original Paper Mario is I think he and other non-playable characters stand out more, because I would say that the partners in the original Paper Mario are not as interesting character-wise. There are some exceptions, like Bo, I would say is great, Watt is great, but in general, I would say the partners stand out far less than Thousand Year Door. That's one place where I think Thousand Year Door clearly outdoes the original.
Yeah, they're a little simpler here. They exist primarily for gameplay purposes rather than story-based reasons. And that's most evident, I think, in the castle of the first chapter, where you get a bomb, and you all you have to do is you rescue them out of a jail cell they're hidden in.
Yeah, her whole story arc is that like she's being chased by a suitor, and that's kind of it, if I remember correctly. It's like, all right, cool, character arc over.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, in that first chapter, I mean, I guess you can include the prologue too, but you kind of get 3 partners all at once.
I was going to say that. Yeah, that's surprising.
And it's just like, it's kind of interesting because, Thousand Year Door kind of gives you one at a time. And to the detriment of maybe the first game, it just kind of makes them all feel kind of samey. I couldn't tell you the personality of the Koopa. Cooper?
Yeah, Koops. Yeah.
No, not
Koops is the one in Thousand Year Door.
I can never tell them apart,
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're definitely right. I think from a gameplay perspective, that's definitely where they come into it. And I guess if you're thinking like right back to the basics of what a Mario RPG is, they're clever to an extent. Like, Mario's moves are basically jump and hammer, and I guess these are meant to be extensions of that. Like, the Koopa is basically another hammer. Like, you can't really jump on enemies. You can be used to hit spiked enemies. So sort of interchanging them is still very simple. Because you just got to think like how Mario works, which again, it just sort of goes back to those basics of what an accessible RPG is.
Right, and that again is something that kind of like owes its roots a little bit to Mario RPG, which did a lot of the initial legwork for how to make Mario work as an RPG. But one thing, I mean, to the point where I feel like this game, despite being called Super Mario RPG 2 at one point, almost just feels like a reboot. Again, the basic story is pretty much identical. They just changed pretty much everything else about it. But one thing that I do like that they added to the game that the original didn't have is that they added first strikes, where now like jumping or hammering an enemy before battle actually gives you a bonus, whereas in the original game it didn't matter who initiated. So I really like that. It added just a little bit more of a platforming element to the core gameplay that was kind of missing otherwise.
Yeah,
I think this might have been my very first RPG that didn't have random encounters, which is kind of crazy to think back on. So I remember loving this system so much.
Good point, because around that time, everything was random battles except for a few, like Mario RPG and Chrono Trigger.
Right, and I always forget, John, that Europe also didn't get Chrono Trigger back on the Super NES either, and that's just, that and Mario RPG, that's just the meanest, most awful thing for you guys to have missed out on in the Super Nintendo days.
Yeah, we were done dirty.
Yeah.
The first strikes weren't in Super Mario RPG?
No.
Okay.
No.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, the first strikes or being hit by an enemy, it literally didn't matter who initiated the battle. It would just go into a battle. Yeah, it is crazy.
Earthbound did it, but that was
I
also...
played that game, and I don't even remember that. That's crazy.
Yeah, Earthbound, you could sneak up on enemies and get the green swirl, or they could sneak up on you and get the red swirl and have an advantage against you.
And that also didn't come out in Europe.
I know, Europe also missed out on that. Oh, man.
Wow, Europe just hated RPGs, or Nintendo hated giving you RPGs at that point.
Yeah, I guess
Seriously.
So.
Don't worry, you guys got Xenoblade first, so...
Yeah,
there you go.
Kind of makes up for it.
Sure.
Another important difference in this game versus Mario RPG was Mario RPG felt more of a world tour type thing, where you start on one end and you work your way all around to the other. Including the fact that you had a world map by which you did this, which is something that will come back in later Paper Marios, being Sticker Star and Color Splash. But one thing that Paper Mario does is kind of change things up, is instead of you going on a world tour in a linear fashion, this time you have a central hub, with Toad Town acting as a hub by which you then reach every other area. So you're constantly revisiting the core town or the central town, and it's fun to see how that kind of evolves, even if not dramatically, but the dialogue is constantly updated throughout the game. Characters are always saying something different, and that's one of the best parts about the Paper Mario series, and largely got to start here. Again, that was started in Mario RPG, but I think Paper Mario kind of cemented the format. But just how alive the world feels with the dialogue, and although I don't think it's quite as snappy or funny or as funny as Thousand Year Door is, you can definitely see the early vibe they were going for, where it's It's light, it's upbeat, it's pretty endearing, and it's just fun to read in general. And to the point that I'll usually check in with every character just to see what they have to say, just because it's fun to hear what's changed and what they have to tell me.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of world maps in RPGs. I think Color Splash got away with it to an extent, but I much prefer this sort of interconnected hub. It makes everything feel like it's alive. It all comes together. And yeah, like you, I'd come back to Toad Town, just talk to everyone again, and each time they'd have something new to say. It felt so refreshing. And I love just the new ways of traversal, like taking a train to where do you take it to? You take it to like this sort of dusty area.
Yeah, the desert area.
The desert area, yeah. So I just loved all these interplays that you can just expand across the world in. It was really well done.
You take a boat at some point, and you walk to the destination of others, which is actually unlike how it worked in Thousand Year Door, where I believe you're always taking either a warp pipe or a vehicle to every region. Whereas here, it actually feels a little bit more interconnected, more like a singular world.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, that's true. But there's also no reason to fix what ain't broke, and clearly Nintendo thought that the hub setup for 64 worked very well for that game because, other than the difference you just mentioned, Andre, where you're always taking some sort of medium to get out of the hub area, they basically copied that for Thousand Year Door. Rogue ported to your hub area, and then you branch out into different directions into the world, from that central point. So, Thousand Year Door owes a lot of what people love about it to 64.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, there's also a lot of stuff to do in Toad Town. There's like that father-son badge shop that changes every other time you play the game. There's the mail area where you can kind of give people mail. You can visit Merlin's shop and get like your fortune read. It's all these things kind of show up again in the Thousand Year Door, but they were here first. There's that weird pig game which I never actually understood the point of, but
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so weird. Yeah, no, I love how much there is to do in the town, and again, that's something that got continued in Thousand Year Door. But this stand in contrast to the Origami King, where you have Toad Town that's literally called the same thing it is here, and it's huge, but there's nothing to do there by comparison to what you can do in this one. Like, I feel like I only used Toad Town in the Origami King as a throwaway, whereas I would happily revisit it in Paper Mario and engage in the activities it had for me.
Yeah, I guess Origami King did take quite a bit from the first game, but it left out a lot of extra stuff that you could have done there. One thing I actually like about both games is that the fact that Peach's castle isn't there, and you can just sort of go over there and be reminded of the looming threat. It's something a lot of RPGs get a bit more jolly as they go on, and they kind of lose their threat. Whereas I love just being reminded of your end goal, which is something both Paper Mario and Origami King do exactly the same. Like, literally exactly the same.
Yeah, Origami King even more so with those streamers always in the sky, which are very pretty to look at, but like there is a part of you where that's like, oh yeah, that's the bad guy. Cool.
Yeah.
That's actually a really good point. I do like those persistent reminders. And since we're talking about the castle real quick, I do wonder if part of the inspiration for having a central hub was Mario 64. Which, was Mario's first foray into 3D. The castle acted as the hub, and though the castle's missing in these cases, the area around it is still the hub, and I wonder if they weren't inspired by that. And also, real quick, this is also the first time we've seen the modern incarnation of Peach's Castle in a Mario RPG, because we had seen it in Super Mario RPG, but it looked completely different than how it looks these days.
Yeah, complete with the music too. It was. I played Mario 64 way before Paper Mario, and just sort of revisiting the castle, having like a near-identical layout, the same music. It's just like returning home.
Yeah, it was. I mean, to the point that a lot of the rooms are even in the same locations, at least in the first foyer area.
Oh, yeah, that's really cool. Like, seeing these rooms that were, like, priorly overtaken by Bowser, like, seeing them what they're meant to be, like a kitchen and things like that, that was really cool.
Yeah, I'm almost surprised they didn't like just throw up paintings of the paintings from Mario 64. It kind of seems like something they would have done, but I don't know why.
Yeah, I mean, they've always kind of played fast and loose with Mario continuity in the sense of the way areas look and their layouts. Like, even Toad Town, right? Toad Town's an Origami King, and there are certain, general vague consistencies with Toad Town in 64, but it's not as though it's anywhere close to a one-to-one match. Really quick, I want to go back to the music for a second, because it's such a perfect example of just the little details that Paper Mario gets so right. And this is something that I only found out about when we were replaying Thousand Year Door for Game Club, and it blew my mind at the time, and it still does now. the regular battle theme for Thousand Year Door and 64 is based on the regular ground theme, like the Mario 1 ground theme. Like the first few notes are the Mario 1 ground theme notes, and I never realized that back in the day.
I've never made that connection.
It's crazy, right? A fan pointed that out to me on Twitter, and I went back and listened to both, and I'm like, oh my god, I've listened to this song or these songs literally hundreds of times in my life, and I now hear them completely differently.
I think
it's such a cool
Sticker
thing.
Star does that as well, at least when you start a battle. I think. I could be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure when you, like, jump on an enemy, it's da-da-da-da-da, or it's something
I think
like
that's Color Splash.
Oh, was it Color
I think it's
Splash? Okay.
Color Splash that does that, yeah.
Okay.
But it's a lot vaguer. Like it's a lot less obvious in 64 and Thousand Year Door. And yeah, if whoever's listening, if you don't believe me, go back and listen to it and really listen for it. It's such a cool little detail.
There's a lot of fun like musical touches like that across the Paper Mario games, but especially in this one. Like if you wait on the chapter select screen for a few minutes, you'll eventually get, I think it might be the ground theme again, or some Mario theme. In Koopa Town, if you change a radio station, you hear the credits theme to Super Mario World, which is a fun touch. And there's a few other moments like that in the game too, or even including the point when you're in the Haunted Mansion. There's a reference to to the original Mario RPG when you go. Oh, I forget how you activate it in this game. I think you interact with the music box or whatever, and Mario turns into an 8-bit sprite, plays a classic Mario theme, which is just basically how it worked in Mario RPG as well. So that's a fun little throwback.
I think he does that too in the dry temple or whatever, with like this giant jar. Like you jump into it and he comes out as it's like the same thing in the Thousand Year Door with the curtain of the X-Naut base.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The music in this game's great, you know. I mean, say what you will about the N64's ability to make sound, but like the music itself is it's pretty top notch.
I mean, the presentation in general holds up remarkably well. Like, yeah, the resolution's low, and I find it easier to go back to 64, or rather, I find the gap less jarring going from Thousand Year Door to 64 than from 64 to Thousand Year Door, where it looks like a straight up HD version of the original. But yeah, going back to this game, like it still looks good, and I like the whole paper aesthetic and just how they incorporate it into the gameplay or into the, I guess, more the visuals than the gameplay specifically in this point. But yeah, it just looks good still.
I'm glad you brought up that point about the paper aesthetic, Andre, because it's interesting. This was back when Paper Mario was still just using the paper aesthetic as kind of a backdrop and theming for the whole thing, but that the game was still very much just a game world. But, you know, contrast that now to Origami King and Color Splash and Sticker Star, especially I would say the latter two. The whole paper theme permeates throughout everything in those games. Like, the characters make self-referential points about them being made of paper. It's as if everyone in the world knows they're made of paper in a world made of paper, and it's just, they make that part of every single aspect of the game. Which, you know, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think it's just probably a subjective thing, whether it's good or not. But it's weird how the series shifted at some point from just having a paper art style aesthetic to really going all in on that paper theme.
Yeah, I mean, in this game, I think Mario flutters in the wind a few times, that's about it. And actually, one thing that Mario does in this game that modern games still don't do, he goes under the covers when he goes to bed.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's nice. He slips right under. I love that.
Yeah. But I totally see where you're coming from, Ash. Like, in modern games, there's like all these stationary equipment, like you have attacks with scissors that cut things up, and you'd have to actually take out things in the environment and work around them and bend them, and that just doesn't happen in this game. Like, paper is more just the presentation, and even then, it's mostly the characters. I wouldn't look at the environment and say that's made out of paper.
Exactly.
It's just where the characters flip. That's really as far as the paper gimmick goes.
Yeah, a lot of the characters look like drawings in this game. Even when you get like a new partner, you're presented with like this very exciting crayon drawing of what the partner is able to do, which is very neat. But again, it feels like everything is a drawing on a page, whereas they have transitioned into this world as made of paper. So rather than like these characters just being drawings that exist in a storybook world, no, they're all just paper people that live in a paper world. And you know, I think it's a preference of what you prefer. I think it can work either way. I've enjoyed both, but yeah, it's neat to see that transition, because you know, even the Thousand Year Door had some paper elements to it with like the boat and the plane, but nowhere near to the extent of like what they've been doing nowadays.
There is something to be said about what they did with the N64. Like this holds up so well. Like if you look at Ocarina of Time, for instance, the performance of that game is not great. Going back to it, the frame rate is just constantly rather low. Whereas this, it feels good to play. It still looks good. And in the context of the N64, there weren't really many RPGs. I can barely count them on one hand. So, this holds up so much of that library. This fills that RPG gap. And it's something just that console just didn't have. And whereas the PlayStation was just rolling in RPGs.
Right.
One thing you mentioned about how this world is designed. I haven't looked at the actual 3D models themselves, ripped from the game. But how could you do that? But one thing I have to kind of give kudos to. When people talk about this game, they often talk about how when it was made, they wanted to have a flat Mario in a 3D world, so that way it could kind of stand out amongst other titles. When you're walking into a building and the building kind of unfolds itself so that way you can see what it's like on the inside, someone had to figure out how to model that building in a way so that way where the seams are, it could actually break away. And obviously the N64, it's fairly primitive in its modeling, so it playing up the paper aesthetic, again, it's just kind of impartial to the design of it. But I just think that's really cool that every building that you go into, someone had to think about how is it they can show this building opening up in a way that doesn't look like it's just the house is blowing up, and instead it's unfolding itself.
Yeah,
exactly.
Well, Xander, that's also something they can revisited in Origami King with the origami itself. If you slow down
absolutely.
footage or look at the way toads are folded, they're folded like actual origami. You have to research exactly how you fold them and how it would work. It's just that attention to detail with this series that really goes the extra mile.
Yeah, I think it's all part of why it largely still holds up to me visually, minus maybe the font they choose to use, which is kind of weird. But I remember reading previews from IGN64 back in the day, and I remember them commenting about how intelligent systems, I have no idea whether this is based on anything or not, but they were struggling with the transition to 3D, which is why, according to IGN, they went with this more simplified art style. And yet, for as simple it may have seemed at the time, it's the exact same reason why it holds up these days. It holds up better than most 64 games, as you were saying, John.
I mean, we've seen that kind of thought process reflected in games like The Wind Waker as well, which that holds up so much because of its stylization. That holds up so much better than more realistic looking games from that era, like Twilight Princess, for example. Yeah. So it's something you could even call this situation like the proto situation for the Wind Waker, the art style they would ultimately go with, and people at the time were like, "This is stupid. What is this? This is such a step back." No, it's future proofing.
Yeah, was there a backlash to that? Because this was this was the redesign of Mario in a sense. I mean, he didn't look that different compared to Toon Link.
That's true.
Link, but was there a backlash at all to this?
Not to the same volume. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember there being any backlash. And I think, this also came toward the end of the 64's lifespan, I think in its penultimate year. So I think people were just at that point happy to have any game because the schedule had started running a little thin then. And also, it just occurred to me too, I don't know if this was intentional, but Dr. Mario 64, which I believe came out the following year and was, I think, one of the final 64 games, even had a bit of a paper look to it too, especially on the title screen. So I wonder if that was an intentional throwback to Paper Mario. Or not throwback, but reference. Or inspired by.
Yeah, maybe. If you look at the sprite quality in when you go to the character select screen too, there's a clear similarity in the art style. I don't know if they're just sort of reusing some sort of engines from Paper Mario or something, because Powered Upon 64 does the same thing. They build Dr. Mario and Powered Upon 64 are built on the same framework. So maybe they were kind of adapted into each other, being late N64 games. But I can totally see what you mean with the similarities. Also,
we should give credit, where credit is fully due, of course, and that's the paper art style, as far as I'm aware, pretty much started with Paul Rapper the Rapper. So I wouldn't be surprised if Paper Mario was somewhat inspired by the look of that game.
I never even put the two together. That's so funny.
Yeah.
I hadn't either.
That was a big game during that era, so...
Yeah, this was one of the first handcrafted titles. I mean, it's kind of blurry to say where that really started. I think a lot of people will point to Yoshi's Island and its crayon aesthetic, but
I suppose.
So when you look back at Paper Mario, are there any moments of the game that stand out to you? Especially now that we've revisited Thousand Year Door, are there any parts of this game that you think basically hold their own against the original, or against the sequel?
the scene where you find out what's in that windmill. I think that's what that building was in Chapter 3.
Yeah, Tubba Blubba.
Tubba Blubba. I didn't drop my controller, but I was just like, what on earth? Like, really weird moment where you find that heart. And then you had like a whole like dialogue exchange with it, and he's like, "You found me, see?" It's just really weird. And then I watched like a Did You Know Gaming video on this, and it turns out like that's based like off of a Norwegian fairy tale.
The giant who had no heart in his body.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love it.
That was such a surprise to see too. Like I was as shocked as you were the first time. Like, what the heck? I'm battling its heart down here.
Like, this is weird.
That was cool. That was cool to rediscover, because the second time I played Paper Mario 64, I had completely forgotten about that game, or that part of the game, despite how cool it is, much like I had forgotten about the twist in Chapter 4 in Thousand Year Door when we were replaying that. So that was a really cool moment to rediscover, and I agree with you, that is absolutely one of the highlights, and that's actually what I was going to say. So since you stole mine, for now I'll just fall back on how good the whole murder mystery, ice area, crystal palace, mirror puzzles. I'll just lean on that from now, unless I can think of something else. But I will say that I really like the whole toy box chapter, and Watt was one of my favorite parts.
You can't get mad at someone for stealing yours and then steal someone else's after giving your own.
Nice. Well, I'll let you go in on that more.
General Shy Guy, as well as Gourmet Guy are two of my favorite characters from this game. I love Gourmet Guy's hilarious, and then I just love the battle with General Shy Guy, because the music is so intense, and I feel like at that point it's probably one of the hardest battles you've come across in the game, if I remember correctly. So yeah, the whole chapter is just a fun little thing, particularly given the mystery of what's going on inside that house, because I think someone mentions they hear voices or people disappear into the house. I forget exactly what the mystery is, but yeah, you have to uncover like a little hidden room. You find the entrance in the toy box, and that shrinks you down to toy size basically as you explore this weird Shy Guy world.
Gosh, you guys are choosing the great ones. I'm starting at the bottom of the barrel here. I'll just say, I think Paper Mario as a series always does a great job with like haunted house areas, and I loved going through the forest and exploring that area. I don't know if it's better than Thousand Year Door, but it is definitely a highlight. I love always going to those kind of areas in a Mario game.
Yeah, I will say I like how they made the journey into to the Haunted Mansion a bit of a mystery itself. You're trying to find your way through the woods in these very creepy woods. You have to look out for these particular elements that are out of place or don't match with its surroundings, including like eyes staring at you. And there's a few really like
the flowers have lips on them.
Yeah,
like, Mario's no stranger to plants having mouths. I mean, that's like one of the basic enemies in every game, but they somehow made that creepy.
They did.
Right.
I'll also say, I think the Bowser's Castle in this game is better than the final castle of Thousand Year Door.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The pacing in the final area, like the Palace of Shadow and Thousand Year Door, is really off. And I know we discussed that to death in Game Club, so I won't go too far into that. But yeah, I agree. I think the Bowser's Castle is just more fun to play through. And also, to that point, Andre, I want to give Paper Mario in general credit for its characterization of Bowser. Like, this is the best version of Bowser the series has ever seen. And I would say that later incarnations of Bowser, or not even incarnations, but like when you see Bowser as he exists in games like Super Mario Odyssey, for example, they kind of take that smart-ass, personality of his that really originated, I would say, in Mario RPG and Paper Mario. And so clearly they love what worked for this characterization of Bowser. And I also love at the same time that the way Paper Mario 64 begins is by actually having Bowser win for once.
I love that so much.
Yeah, he actually, like, the game, like, establishes right off the bat, oh wait, this is not the Bowser you think you know. He's actually a threat this time. And it starts by him defeating Mario, something we wouldn't see again, if I can remember correctly, until Super Mario Odyssey.
Yep.
Yeah, it's like the entire game is about getting powerful enough to beat Bowser. Like, that's so good. Like, that's your motivation the entire time.
I love that.
That's a really good point. I mean, they straight up tell you that too. Like, the stars are like, hey Mario, you can't take Bowser on right now, so you better get going. You better start working out, buddy.
And they kind of like build it up where they're like, yeah, if you don't save all the star spirits, like no one's wishes will be granted, and there's no hope in the world. And it's like, okay, as an adult, you're like, okay, whatever, sure, I'll do that. But as a kid, you're probably like, oh shoot, let's go.
Yeah, I mean, totally. Although I do feel like, and you might be able to speak more to this, Xander, and perhaps you too, John, is for me, having come off Mario RPG, I had seen that basic same story before, and it felt less intense this time, like less imperative, because I mean, for any number of reasons, given the, again, at the time, more childish aesthetic, along with the fact that, you know, it's just Bowser against an alien invasion. Like in Mario RPG, it felt like there was a lot more at stake, whereas here it's like, yeah, of course I'm gonna beat Bowser. I've beaten him 1,000 times before. Yeah, he's more powerful now, but I'm gonna take him out regardless. And also there was no like real central character that joins you as that represented this. Well, I guess the stars do join you, but they're not really characters. Whereas in Mario RPG, you had Geno. You had someone who had a vested interest, you know, with the perspective of what you're trying to save, which is something that we're kind of missing a little bit in Paper Mario by comparison. It's not a huge deal. I'm just nitpicking, but it's just that when you compare the two stories back to back as they released for someone who grew up with them, it was a little weird just to see it again portrayed in a slightly different way.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, I guess it was a bit different for me. Like, I came into this, and it kind of started off as your usual Mario game, kind of like Odyssey does, where it's literally just Mario versus Bowser. You're on the final showdown right at the start, and Bowser beating you was just such a twist for me. Like, I was pretty young in my RPG career and in my Mario career, so like seeing this come out so quickly at the start of the game was kind of nuts. So I think, just that build-up to try and beat him was really effective on me at the time.
Yeah, for me, it's kind of weird to say this, but Bowser, growing up, was always just the bad guy for the 2D and 3D platformers, whereas I grew up with all the RPGs, except I didn't play Legend of the Seven Stars or Paper Mario. So, you know, I grew up with the Mario and Luigi games, and those games always had guest villains like the Shroobs and Fawful and Cackletta and all them. So Bowser was always just like an aspect of those stories who was a force to be dealt with for sure, but he was never like the big bad at the end of the game. I won't spoil that, but like, because he's involved with those games' endings for sure, but like he wasn't like the primary threat. So when I came to Paper Mario in college, you know, it was kind of like something to be expected. It was just kind of neat to finally have an experience where it was an RPG where Bowser was the star bad guy. Whereas in my experience, you know, like the big twist of Bowser being in Sunshine was like the jaw-dropping moment for Xander when he was like 12 years old, which it's probably lame now to say that, but you know, I don't know, it's not hard to blow a kid's mind, I think.
Well, even in the Paper Mario series, like Color Splash, for instance, I think the entire premise is like, oh no, Bowser jumped in some paint. Stop him. Whereas like this, it's very basic, but it still has it elaborates on itself far more than something like that.
It's like every time you would save one of the paint star, and they would like show off their memories, it would show a little snippet of Bowser causing problems, and I'm like, this isn't really revealing any story to me. You're acting like this is like something I should care about. It's just Bowser causing trouble.
Mm-hmm. Well, and Sticker Star and Color Splash both stripped Bowser of that, you know, wonderful Paper Mario personality, which is one of the things I don't like about those games, even though I do enjoy Color Splash more than most, like you, Andre. That was one of those things it's unforgivable to me, is to strip Paper Bowser of his personality.
Hold up. Color Splash, he does talk in Color Splash.
He gets like 3 lines at the end of the game. It's not really.
He talks at the beginning too, if I remember correctly.
Really?
It's not the same thing though. You know, it's
I
not
literally can't remember this.
He doesn't talk at all in Sticker Star.
Yeah, no, Sticker Star. I hated him as Sticker Star. I hate everything in Sticker Star. So
yeah,
and to
he
Bowser's,
does talk a little in Color Splash. Yeah,
to Bowser's portrayal too. Or something portraying Bowser in this game. I do love when you're fighting the. I guess we even touched on some of the other characters, like basically the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in this game, the Koopa Troopa game.
Right.
It's a clear reference, which again harkens back to Mario RPG, which itself had a Power Rangers reference, or whatever they were called in Japan.
The Axum Rangers.
The Axum Rangers, yeah. And in this case, they control a giant robotic Bowser, which reminded me a little bit of Luigi's Mansion, which more on that in a second, by the way. And Bowser mentions how he wants his own Paper Bowser game, and we're still waiting for it 20 years later. Where's Paper Bowser, Mario or Nintendo?
Yeah, we got the Mario and Luigi Bowser.
We got a Mario and Luigi Bowser game at least, but come on, where's Paper Bowser?
Yeah,
exactly.
So
Bowser's great, you know. Like, even those few lines he had in Color Splash were funny. Like, I think it was like after you like save him or whatever, he's like, "What, Mario? What are you doing here? Do we have a go-kart scheduled or something?" Like something like that.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Right. Okay. That's right. Yeah.
Well, speaking of referencing other Nintendo games too, something else they do in this game is, one, they actually give Luigi a bit of a personality, because Luigi did not appear in Mario RPG at all, minus like a couple dialogue references and appearing in the parade at the end of the game, which, by the way, also started what would become a trend in the Paper Mario games. But we actually get a proper Luigi here that you interact with throughout. Like, you can go back to Mario's house and talk to Luigi and see, his thoughts on things. To the point that you can find a hidden diary in the basement where you can read like Luigi's innermost thoughts, and he'll reference a few other Mario games throughout, like Mario Party and Mario Kart, I think. But he even references seemingly Luigi's Mansion, where he talks about his encounter with a ghost and how he's scared and how he wants, how he can hopefully be strong enough one day to battle, to take on these ghosts. And this was just a few months effectively before Luigi's Mansion, so I always thought that was a fun little thing, and that was their first look at Luigi really in a story-based context.
A neat aspect of that is that Luigi's Mansion kind of returns that, in that the book that the first portrait ghost is reading has Paper Mario written on the cover.
Oh man, there we go.
So cool.
It's full circle. It's like poetry. Yeah. It rhymes.
It does.
That's awesome. Well, do you guys have any final thoughts all about Paper Mario that we haven't addressed somehow yet?
We've addressed it, but I want to emphasize the little spin. So good. Makes
so
the version
good.
so much more fun.
I can't believe they got rid of that. Probably only so they had Yoshi have some ability to give you in the main world. But even Yoshi's not as good as a spin. The spin is just straight up better, and it takes too long to get Yoshi in Thousand Year Door.
And do you know what it's called? It's called the Spin Dash. They had the audacity to name it the Spin Dash.
Sonic owned.
That is ridiculous. No, and that was always a lot more fun to use as a way to get around the world more quickly, as opposed to like the tube form and Thousand Year Door, because you have that wind up you have to do first. It's a little weird to control. Yeah, once you got kind of like the buffering down with the spin dash in Paper Mario 64, like you could just do it perfectly. You could time it perfectly and just spin your way across the entire game.
Yeah, you do get like I think his name's Lackluster. He kind of gives you the same ability that Yoshi gives you.
That's true.
But again, you don't get him until way hours into the game. And actually, like I was saying earlier, even though I'm a diehard Thousand Year Door lover, I just think that like after having played this game, it has really kind of put into check like the elements of the Thousand Year Door that I should actually be giving credit to this game. Especially with the partner abilities, a lot of them are kind of copy and pasted into the Thousand Year Door, like throwing up a bomb, or having Lesser, or using Paracarry to kind of like float for a few seconds to another end of the room. It's just like, wow, they didn't really think about like what to do with those too hard in the sequel. They were more focused on like how do we use paper for traversal in a sense,
right?
Which is interesting, but it's again just kind of something to keep in mind when you're comparing them.
Interestingly enough, it seems like Thousand Year Door, the main way Thousand Year Door was concerned with evolving was its story, world building, and characters. Because as you said, Xander, a lot of gameplay-wise, a lot of the partners are kind of copy-pasted from 64. But the partners themselves as characters are so much more interesting and feel like they're part of that world and feel like they have agency. And I would say that's really the main thing that sets Thousand Year Door apart from 64 in general, is just the story, the world, the lore, the characters. It's just much more fleshed out. It feels like a real world. Rogueport is much more interesting than Toad Town. So gameplay-wise, yeah, it's interesting. Thousand Year Door owes so much of what it does well to 64, and 64 does some of that better, like with the lack of backtracking in comparison. But Thousand Year Door really took the story and the characters to a new level.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't disagree. So it's fun to see, what that game evolved from, and what they took from the original game and built upon in the sequel, including elements of the game that don't necessarily work quite as well. Like, I think the overall flow of the game is probably better in Paper Mario 64, even if the overall narrative isn't as interesting or as deep as it could be in Thousand Year Door. So it's cool that they each have their own pros and cons, and neither eclipses the other.
Right.
I'd like to see this game revisited at some point. I know, with the recent news of characters not being allowed to show certain demographics, I don't really buy that, because they've done that with the Mario and Luigi remakes as of a few years ago. So I think it's possible that they could revisit this game, but who's to say that they will or won't. But if they do it, there's part of me that's kind of like, I don't want them to lose the charm that this game has. Like, for example, like I don't want it to be where you open up a door and go into a building, it's suddenly like a black screen. I kind of want to see like the building unfold itself again. Just little things like that. But yeah, it's a neat game.
So if you haven't had a chance to check out Paper Mario for yourself, I recommend doing so. You can on the Wii U eShop. I think one of the only ways to access this game officially now. So yeah, hopefully they'll remake it at some point. I would love an HD compilation pack of the first two. Just give us more of that classic Paper Mario goodness at some point. But I don't need to start a petition over it or anything. Anyways, Xander, where can people follow you at if they wanted to hear more about your thoughts on all things Paper Mario? If they haven't had enough on our own channel.
Yeah, I know. I'm just on your own channel now. At Morning Shark on Twitter. I also make a lot of content for Nintendo World Report TV.
Perfect, and you can find links to all that in the description below. And with that, I think we're about done here, so thank you so much for watching and listening to our celebration of Paper Mario's 20th anniversary, which, God, that's still crazy to me. Jeez, 20 years ago, that got my birthday. I don't even want to think about it. So, I'm not. Yeah. I'm going to end it now. All right, everyone, we'll catch you later. Bye.